afternoon. I hope you all enjoyed your lunch. If you didn't get enough or you want to take some food with you, there was loads left which will be available up top again. And there's some, not now, and there's some tin foil for you to make yourself a doggy bag. There is a disclaimer though that Canterbury Cathedral Lodge want you to aware that the quality might not be as good as it was at lunchtime, so no complaints please. We all here? Excellent. Is everyone back? Is anyone missing a partner, a buddy? Some more sneaking in. Right, we'll open up the first question to the floor, so if anyone's got a question to start us off, just raise your hand. Oh, that might happen. Right, we'll start with one of these ones then. For Stephen. In your opinion, what is the minimum size of a designated dog walking space?
Oh, interesting. I mean, yeah, sure.
It depends what you want to achieve, for example, and in terms of the demand, because some of the, what we would call in North America dog parks, and I've seen some really small ones in North America where people quite like them for the dogs, but they don't walk, they tend to just sit and the dogs play. So in terms of that, supporting that human-animal interaction and getting fitter and better, that doesn't help. But I was just at Jeskins Community Woodland, I don't know if anybody from down here, so that was a site I went back to look at actually, because it was something I was involved in about 15 years ago. And there's a couple of, what they call dog training areas, because we don't want to. Dog parks is quite a low in terms of training areas, and somebody's nodding who maybe does Jeskins or something. Yeah, okay. Right, because there was Lady Denise Bird who was there, disabled. And there, the two paddocks must only be each about less than a quarter of an acre, I would say, and really popular, but that's more just for training and first steps. You know, if we're really wanting to make a big difference in terms of people taking a walk somewhere where they're happy, it can be off lead all the time, then we know from some of the work that Foot Ecology have done and others that we're looking at something that allows a walk around 2.6 kilometres, which is quite big. So it depends what you want to do with it. Or if it's you saying we want to have some engagement, maybe run some dog training sessions to get people to either be able to walk their dogs on a lead with it loose, because we know if the dog's pulling on a lead, then they're more likely to then have the dog off lead, or to get better recall. So it depends what use you want to put it to, really. But in terms of, in some places people will value anything. That's why we see people walking their dogs on the edge of busy roads, because they're trying to make the best choice possible. Just like some people run on the edge of busy roads because that's where they feel safest, even though other places could have less traffic, but from a personal safety perspective. But it would depend on the context. But if anything can be helpful, but I would say if you're pinning me down for a figure, I would say at least an acre. But it all depends what you're wanting to achieve and the demographics of where you are. But equally, I would always say make sure the planning authorities are putting in sufficient green space, because some are really, really good, like in Dorset and other places in Thames Basin Heaths. Others, in terms of mitigation funding, are asking, I know one authority that's asking for like £100 per home, and that's like going to get you a signpost. Whereas Thames Basin Heaths, we're talking about thousands, and similarly in Dorset.
Awesome. Did you want to add it?
Anybody else?
Thank you very much. Next one. I think this one will have to be bad. What is the most important species of bird?
Is this on?
If it's got the riddle.
You have to flip the bottom.
Oh, that's just so embarrassing, because anyone would know I'm not from a bird background or partnership working background, so I'm happy to defer that one to anybody else. But all of them are important, that's the thing. We find that when we can tell people a little bit about the story of the bird, so the journey that they've had to come to us, or something about how they do or don't interact as a family group, or something particular that they do as a behaviour, when the person understands something specific, it then becomes something that they can relate to more, and something that they are then much more engaged with and happy to modify their behaviours very moderately, so that we can share our shores with the birds and have our good recreational time.
Some of these are quite broad massive problem, global issues, but we're not going to go. Tony, I'm going to throw this at you, I'm afraid. Do you think the production of electric cars are having a negative impact on animal habitats? Do you think the production of electric cars are having a negative impact on animal habitats?
Wow.
Yeah.
I don't know who's actually looked into that to actually see that one, so I have to defer that one as well, unfortunately.
Is there anyone out there? No. No? No? Right? There we go. What's that? Anna?
Does the cars being quieter mean... Sorry, I didn't really think what the question was going to be before I heard it. But is the silentness of the car, does that have an impact on wildlife and birds because they can't see it or hear it coming as much as a noisier car?
That's noise disturbance as opposed to where the electricity is coming from or being generated. It's such a big question underneath it.
I'll give you a nice one. Skip.
John.
Oh, sorry, John.
Well, it's not
Yes, please.
I mean, we're more in danger from electric cars than animals, but birds particularly are highly visual. I mean, some birds have better hearing than others, but it's going to be birds that come down to roads that would be the most susceptible. And I think of birds like birds of prey, like owls or raptors, like buzzards. But visually, they're so perceptive. And I would hope that it would too much impact.
Just to add something to that, not particularly wildlife, but there was some work done by the British Horse Society because they were concerned about electric cars and would horses be more aware of the vehicles coming up behind more or less because they're making less noise. And actually the work that they were doing, as I recall, was that actually the horses did notice them still, and actually more so because with the horse you can see which way it's turning its ears. Because there were much more higher frequencies that we can't hear. So actually there's the tonal qualities as well, as that we might think they're quieter overall, but actually depending on what frequencies the particular target animal we're thinking of, it might be higher. But also I think you make a good point which then relates to habituation, because if you've got like constant noise, actually the species might well habituate to that more than actually if you just get like a one-off and then it's more of a startle because they're all a bit like the difference between lots of people using one path but then somebody doing orienteering where they take very different routes, which actually then get harder to predict. And we heard about turnstone this morning, that actually they can be quite close to people if there's predictability there. So there's lots of questions there, and I'm just amazed how educated this group is to Bert and Tony with such a great questions.
It's me and Bert and Tony.
Yeah, so the question before, though, I quite like that one as well about these particular species, so I'll just add to that one because it's just like that birds won't respect boundaries either, where they go. It's such an open-ended sort of section. Same as for a bird and what's the most important bird species, such a difficult one to do. Whereas there are, again, we've put in our own guidelines for this, and this is where things like designations come into being, particularly where sort of bird-wise, both the North Kent and East Kent and Bird Aware are working towards some of the important species that have been identified. And in our particular case, I know the Thanet Coast Project has been having a key indicator species, which we've taken as a turnstone, mainly because it's always been put up on a pedestal as being one of the species which under the special protected area is one of the species of importance for the North East Kent area. So we've got our own sort of pedestal of a bird to look at. But as far as the other migrating species go, they're all important on that side, and all have their own sort of contribution really to this area. But it's and this is why Birdwise at the moment those stands are superb up there to actually identify all the different species of importance, and we've already heard about the different categories of endangered as well. The BOCC is on there, so it's it's something which obviously it's another open-ended question really, because your own particular species may be important, but we've got our own pedestal built already.
Tony? Do you have any tips for starting a conversation with a dog walker who is in the wrong place? They're actually on there. So that you don't come across as confrontational or accusing.
so our work is obviously based around best practice and the advice that we've had from Steve, and it's really about building rapport with the dog walker. So the thing that the dog walker is most interested in is generally their dog. So we start conversations about their dog, and is this an area they regularly walk in? And it's as simple as just saying, oh, that's a lovely dog. What breed is it? How old is it? Is it somewhere you walk regularly? And we build that rapport with them to begin with. And then after that, they generally ask about who are Dorset Dogs, what do you do? And we explain to them. And it's about highlighting that positive access management as well as responsible dog ownership. So we're talking to them about why we do the things the way that we do. And then we feed those messages in after that, and we have our free goodie bags, and it generally helps that our free goodie bags have a dog treat in them. So dogs generally come over to you first, and then that starts a conversation. So if I have a top tip, it's to have some treats in your free goodie bags if you have free goodie bags. So it's that building rapport which then allows you to have a conversation after that.
Yeah, absolutely. We do that as well with the dog treats. I'm just looking for Greg.
Yes.
Oh, there he is. We've got a big barrel of dog biscuits in the back of our van, which often falls over, and a dog's jumping into the back of the van to get the dog treats.
You start smelling of it as well.
Yeah. Anna, I think you might have something as well. How does dog poo affect the nesting birds? Right. Tony? Dog poo affecting nesting birds?
I'm sure that's a whole conversation about what's habitat. So, let me phrase the side of the question: where is there a place for prohibition on conservation sites? Because let me give you background. So, the Wildlife Trust in the last 6 months have had 5 years to build 2 long-haul tanks. Now, I'll get it there to Devon. I get that, but that is happening. We're having staff reviews, we're having volunteers picking up, we're actually doing staff body counts. Now, in line with that, we're also working with bird guides on both coasts to do really quite good engagement work, but that doesn't cover all of it. So, at what stage do we say nutrient loading from dog nests, disturbance of ground nesting birds, which is even harder than a lot of inland habitats and is from coastal habitats? The fact that you mentioned Jeskins, which was built on overflow for shore, which in itself is now so around over that we're seeing dog walking issues being moved onto private farmland in that area, onto other conservation sites. So we're kind of being the nicer end of this, but actually where is that point of prohibition? And what do we get to say as a Wildlife Trust, and I know colleagues in the West Country doing this already, say that site has no dogs at all. That site we are very clear, it's not under control, because that's a term that there's a lot of ambiguity in the economy. So, this comes into the spatial planning piece, it comes into the broader habitat impact, it comes into how Banff is brilliant, but it's a hell of a lot bigger than East Kent with our scattered, fragmented sites. How do we begin thinking in that kind of context?
Okay. No, it's a great point, because it's all about choice, and every site is different. Because going back to which bird is most important, it all depends as well, because you've got some iconic ones and maybe a good indicator species. But yeah, there's a whole load of stuff there, because we're understanding more as well in terms of watercourses. So some of the treatments that are being put on the dogs in terms of, and elsewhere, in terms of dealing with flea treatments and stuff. So there's a lot of stuff which dog owners, in that respect, don't realise what the problem is, but how do we manage that? But for individual sites, I think for Wildlife Trust it's quite interesting, because if you've got some sites where there's no right to public access, that gives you a very different context compared to where you've got rights of way or access land or coastal margin or that sort of thing. But I would also be thinking about displacement and also segmenting those, the angels, devils and fallen angels. And one of the things, and it's a tool rather than a bigger issue, but one of the key things is if you're going to put efforts into dealing with the problem people, sometimes what folk do is rather than dealing with problem people, we'll just have everywhere on leave or complete dog bans, and actually you upset a lot of the fallen angels who actually are trying to do the right thing, and then think badly about the organisation or whatever. But there's a process that the local authorities can do. Probably some of you are familiar with public spaces protection orders, so those can designate areas for either on lead, no dogs, whatever they are. And those can be used in town and country and the coast. Sometimes they're used more in urban areas. But there's also, in that same legislation, community protection notices. So those can be targeted at specific individuals. So rather than upsetting all the dog owners, and also remembering if you've got public spaces protection order, the problem people, the devils, are probably going to be the ones who ignore it anyway. But a community protection notice can require all sorts of things, and it can be tailored to that individual. So it can be things like the dog always wears a muzzle, or you don't go to places, or you go to dog training classes. Or when we look at the figures we know from the police across the UK, that in most cases the owner of the dog isn't present when there's been a livestock attack because they're either free roaming or just being left out, this sort of thing. That you're required to keep your fencing of your house in good order, or these sort of things. So how do you decide? I think it's a balance between what interventions can you have and work. And one of the difficulties with some of your sites, and I know some of yours in Kent, is that we're already dealing with established behaviours, and it's very, very hard to change those established behaviours. That people have been, walking the dogs down at Pegwell and Sandwich Bay or Culver or whatever it may be for decades. And one of the questions you'll get thrown back to you is like, why is this important now? And if you just turn around and say, oh, well, it wasn't worth the money before, but now we've got some money from developers, so all of a sudden it is important. That's not really that persuasive. But certainly in terms of spatial planning, and this relates to some of the work I'm doing with Natural England on the Coast Path, I'm very, very cautious where we've got areas where there hasn't been any traditional access at all, whether it by just informed trespass or whatever, because it's very hard to take it away. So I think it's also about fighting your battles. And if you have like one site where you're starting to get bitten, for example, not bitten by fleas, but the bird, then I would say that's quite a high priority. But it's picking your battles as well. But it's really frustrating, but I would also be careful to make sure that you don't upset the wider community of dog walkers, who also could be the good people to give you the intelligence on the people who are causing the problems, but target the problem people. So I know that's more of us interventions rather than an issue, but this is why I live in the far north of Scotland, but most of my work is in Southern England, because we've got lots of space there, lots of nice species, you've got lots more people and a lot less space, so I feel for you. But still, I think the planning system and having planning committees that will listen to what Natural England say and folk like you and get appropriate mitigation and not just use it as a bit of a socket is vital. And that's why I'm really concerned about what might happen to the Birds and Habitats Directive and how that's interpreted into UK law.
Sorry, just to highlight some two bits. So I think that, the enforcement piece is really interesting, because actually, even without lots of their directives, what have any actually done proactively in a lot of these sites to act in their regulatory way? They haven't. Yeah. What they've said is how much more data do we need to get to the point where there are no birds there, but that's not a problem, and we've got. And it feels when you're at the sharp end of it, that is almost a systemic thing in those agencies, that there is a deep position to need to know more rather than take action. So I think there's something there. And you talk about long-term behaviours. There are sites we manage that have got a long-term history of people running trials like that. So talk about paws on them, shooting on them. We don't know how we prohibit that, we take legal action against those. That is done. So I think there is a kind of broader set of issues here that we need to be thinking about kind of stick and carrot approach. And I think the longer I do it, the more I find myself having to look at the stick side of it. So I'm not seeing that they will change people to do. But we need to see commensurate with the threat that we are facing. Not just from people access, but just from the general wider threats that are out there. So it's a really urgent one.
Yeah. I want to say I will pick your battles and look at the context as well, because some sites you can get behavioural change a lot better if they're somewhere else, for example, for off-lead. But if there isn't another option, then that's a lot more tricky. But I wouldn't be afraid of taking action against those problem visitors with dogs, because they get a bad name for everybody. And some authorities say restrict everybody because of the bad behaviour by a minority. So I wouldn't be shy of that. The legislation is, the local authorities will sometimes tell you it's quite complex, but if you start talking about community protection notice, then that's a really flexible tool, and you can use that in a preventative way. So even if a sheep hasn't been attacked, if that dog's been in a situation that it's roaming or not coming back when called, then a CPN can be a really good incremental process, which eventually could lead to a big fine and a prison sentence. But some councils, again, resources. To be honest, we could do all of this if we had more space, better planning and good enforcement. So I feel for you, but pick your battles, I would say.
Answer the original question about the impact on gravity and the impact on nesting birds. So from the New Forest National Park, and so our mitigation is mainly around running birds and holding them to spring and summertime. Winter birds. And we've had, over the last couple of years, we've had some great research done by Game and Wildlife Conservation Trust, looking at curlew nests and rabbit and bird nests, and also tying in with that. They're doing another project around foxes and predator control on nesting birds down the Avon Valley. Really interestingly, the fox predation on those ground nesting birds is actually as much, if not more so, a problem than recreation concerns. Through that project that Game Conservation Trust is doing, they've actually looked at some of the foxes to see what they've been eating. And interestingly, a huge proportion of their diet is dog food. So actually, by allowing kind of dogs to kind of feel the worries to not pick up after your dog, actually you're kind of creating this artificial food source for the dogs. So actually, it kind of, it's very much all tied together. So we're asking people not to disturb the birds by walking on the track. But if people aren't picking up as well, then they're actually feeding the foxes, which also it's been really interesting to get that information from them. So the impact of dog food on birds is that it's feeding the predators that will eat the birds, which is that.
What's the subject for
Yes.
So it's kind of related to what the gentleman was saying, and it's a question for the panel and for yourself. So we talked about these great projects you do at the dog wildlife conflict, but how are you measuring progress over time? Is it working with all these initiatives? So wildlife conservation, we're very good at putting projects in place, and we'll out after 5 years, and then we don't know anymore. So like after any of the projects you've been involved in, are you going around with questionnaires, or are you doing surveys on the birds that might be disturbed, or how are you measuring progress?
Thank you. When we started our project, it probably got off the ground in earnest in about 2016. It was set up with a 5-year monitoring programme, name-checked footprint ecology that helped write that. And we have been doing that. So we've been creating a database of a lot of information. We've got visitor numbers, we've got car park surveys, we've got observed instances of people's behaviour with and without a ranger present, a whole suite of information. Additionally, every time the ranger does a site visit, there's a whole wealth of information collected at that point too. How many people did they see? How receptive were people to the messages? What types of disturbance? Those sorts of things, all ticking away in the background, large database of information. What we're undertaking at the moment, again with footprint ecology, is that they're routing through all of that back history. Behaviour change doesn't happen across the community in a moment. It's a long-term, long game. And we have had the comfort of our governance committee realising that. So they've not been on our back from day one. Where's your evidence? What's your proof? So we're now at this sort of critical point where we are having that large assessment, looking at everything in perspective over that journey of time to see where we've come out or not. And that's going to be quite a key point for us when we get the results of that in the new year. And from that, I'd then like to do a forward planning exercise of a 5-year plan, because we always say that there's too much to do, and it's about picking the bits we can do properly and doing some of them, hopefully quite a lot of them properly rather than all of them a bit shabbily. What we've also done is from our original staffing model, we had a lot of rangers, we've got some engagement, we've got some dog specialists, and we've got myself, and we were all, with our best intentions and our best efforts, going out and doing our best and favourite strengths and projects. And we did a behaviour change for nature course that was led by the Wildlife Trust, Becky Fisher from there. And she said, that's all very well and good, but if you've done an intervention, if you haven't recorded a baseline, you've done your intervention, physical or interaction, whatever you've done, and then you collect some data afterwards, if you never had that baseline, how do you know you made a change? So we took that on board, and all of our best efforts we had no proof for, and we were able to argue the case that we need an additional member of staff as a monitoring officer, and they help us actually look at to achieve baseline information on the smaller nuances of what we do. So where we bring in a wildlife-friendly code of conduct, we can study the baseline before, do it, and then study the after effects, and then hopefully tweak and move and see longevity or not occurring and where we need to circle back round. Because if we don't have that, we're just semi-blind, really. So that's what we're trying to do, that sort of baseline and the forward projection. Yeah. So.
Sorry, just to follow on from that, are any of the things that you're measuring related to bird numbers or anything conservation, or is it all fairly?
We have filtered in the bird numbers, but because we do the winter birds, we hear so much that because they're kind of on our watch for 6 months of the year, whether or not it was a good lemming season and the Arctic foxes ate the lemmings or our babies, all that kind of thing has such a big influence. We do look at where the birds are, we do look at where they're moving, we look at the numbers of instances of disturbance, but perhaps, although we collect it and we can always get it backdated, the emphasis on the actual bird numbers is perhaps not so indicative of the direction of travel of our work. It's a weird thing to get your head around, took me a while, but the bird numbers are less significant than the behaviours of the people.
I mean, yes, we've got lots of stuff for the scouts, saying over there, and most people are doing the right thing, but there are enough that aren't for any kind of conservation outcome.
So I'll just pass you on to Anneke as well, but the point of, and that would be my advice, what Anna's saying as well, because the difficulty is that when you've got so many confounding variables, in terms of, as Anna's saying, what happens where they feed elsewhere and all these sort of things, or other disturbances, it's really difficult. So my advice would always be to look at the behaviour change that you can, you can measure, and being really clear about that, as Anna said, having good baseline, but also being clear that instead of using terms like, was the dog under close control or whatever, but it be really specific, like, did the dog stay on the path or something like that, because so you're minimising problems caused by interpretation. Even though the outcome is about the birds, I think there's so many confounding variables that you could be setting yourself up to fail. You could do a really good project, but something else happens, whether it's a supply of food or nesting or something, particularly migratory birds, and it could make your project look really poor, even though you've done lots of really good stuff. I'll just pass on to Anneke, because I know Dorset Dogs have done some good monitoring with technology as well.
Yeah, so we're lucky we don't work in isolation, so our project sits under the Urban East Partnership, and as part of the Urban East Partnership we have 2 monitoring officers who collect a lot of data similar to Anna, and then we also collect our own data around our engagement work, and that goes out as far as about social media engagement as well, and our membership numbers, and all of those figures feed back into the data that Footprint Ecology put together for us. And then we have sort of individual monitoring for projects. So our Canine Firewise patrol project, each time one of our volunteers goes out on patrol, they complete a form which feeds back to us, and we can look at that and then compare it to some of the fire data and things like that. So we do monitoring, and we're actually moving to something in line with what all of our team uses. So our wardens this year and our seasonal wardens have trialled Survey 123, is it Amy? Yeah. And so we'll be moving our data collection onto that as well, and hopefully collect more thorough data sets.
Just aware of the time, so we'll make this the last question we're about to ask.
I was just going to ask how do you measure how successful people are
So Tony's got 25 years of experience.
Yes, sorry, I missed the question.
how do you measure how successful people are to your messages? The quality of engagement.
Actually, I don't know if I can answer that directly at the moment, but I would say that we have, around the Thanet Coast, we've got a scheme of coastal wardens, volunteer coastal wardens, who monitor activities around, and with regard to actually some monitoring data of things which are happening, they're measuring activities around the coast, but they're also recording where coastal conducts, voluntary coastal conducts are being broken. And this is one way of actually sort of feeding back to the management scheme, we're over dealing with management of the areas. But this is very much going through a voluntary coastal conduct scheme and seeing how effective that particular is, which ones are being broken on there. I don't, at the moment, I can't think of an example of going directly through people's behavioural ones, which I know is more sort of behavioural exercise, which Stephen will deal with directly on that side. So it's a bit different. But I think Cordelia wants to add something quickly, though.
I think it brought up one of the biggest issues that we've got. How on earth do we measure the success of our engagement is something that is a really difficult one. However, and I've got some sheets printed out upstairs, there's something called Nature Itself as an evaluation tool. I've talked to a couple of people about it today. It's really simple, and that's what's so fantastic about it, is it's universally useful for pretty much any audience group, and you just ask people to hold up 2 circles. And depending on how close they put them together, that's how connected to nature or not they feel. And if you can do that before and after an activity, you can at least get some gauge in terms of are you moving in the right direction. It's not an easy thing, but it's one of those things that, as we move forward, as was asked earlier, understanding that relationship between reaching our conservation goals and actually reaching our nature connectedness goals for people that go hand in hand. And I think a much more holistic viewpoint is what will eventually get us there. That's really the key. But yeah, please come and get a sheet and tell you all about nature itself, and it's a useful tool. It's free to everyone.
Thank you very much. I'm just very aware of the time now, so we've when the panel there, but we have got another networking opportunity, so if you've got any more questions for the panel, then ask them then. Thank you very much.